So, this is the Galaxy XR. A lot of you guys might have seen this around, all over the pages, all this kind of fun stuff. And I'm here to kind of tell you about it. What do I think? Is it worth it? To kind of just ruin it and spoil it for you guys. Do I think it's worth it? I feel like it's more something that maybe you want rather than need. But in short answer, it's worth it if you're a collector of, these kinds of things. For example, the Apple Vision Pro, or like you got some MetaQuest laying around, maybe some early model. I don't know if you guys remember, like the Oculus, back when Samsung had their version of Oculus back then, and you had to slap your phone onto the actual fascia of, the actual headset. So, I do think it's worth it for those people. But if you're someone who also, wants to complete the ecosystem as me, I also think it's worth it for those people. But, long term, I'm not really too sure what to tell you. I use it here and there. It's more of a fun little gadget to have around. But let's get started. So, right off the bat, the design is great. I love the design. You got the little easy mechanism here that, you just turn. That's to adjust, and tighten right there, tighten it. And then a lot of people who I've let borrow this, they forget this thing. So, be aware of that. If you do get a pair of these, you can just do that. It's not something you'll break unless you're trying to break it actively. And this part right here, you do get a little sweaty when it comes to this area right here, as most XR experiences. You do tend to get a little sweaty on this side of the region. This side is not too bad because you got all that room to breathe. But since you have what is the internals on the inside right here, you have, for example, let's take off the cover on this thing. And if you ask me, there's not really a proper way to do it if you own, this kind of headset. I just like to grab it from the bottom and just kind of start tearing at it. And I do this very gently because I'm not gonna lie to you, this is my second pair. And you might be thinking, why do you have two? I don't have two, I have one. The first one that I did get, unfortunately, did have a defect on it. It seemed to be a sensor issue. I don't know what happened. I don't have kids or anything at the house to actually mess with it. I do have cats, but, they're never in here, and, they're always sleeping. But I don't know. Could have been them. I'll never know. But these have been good to me so far. This has a really funny texture, if you guys were wondering. It's very I don't want to say matte, but it feels very rubbery, but it's not rubbery. Anyways, so, right here you have what is your sensors. You have the two ones right there. You have, these four, and you also have the bottom ones down here, these right here. You also have your audio right here, what is the speakers, all that stuff. This is a sensor, if you guys were wondering what that was. So, I actually played with it a little. If you put your finger right there, I don't know if you guys know about the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. When you put them on, they have a little sensor as well. So, I'm assuming they use the same kind of technology right here. For those wondering, what are these hideous things right here? So you can actually remove those, but these essentially are for, a bit better of immersion, if you're watching, for example, a movie, because I know you have Netflix on these. So if you're watching a movie, none of that light can get in through, these bottom holes or the side. And especially if you're wearing this part, it's going to extend that. And you might be wondering, can I remove this? Yes, you can. They come with two pieces. So this is one piece, and then not the anime. And then there's another piece that, you just insert right there. For those who have maybe a smaller forehead or maybe larger, or just, comfortability wise. But like I said, you tend to get really sweaty among that region. So, for me personally, I like to remove it. For me, it doesn't really bother me. Anyways, and yes, there is an incorrect way of putting it. For example, Can't put it in like that. See, much as I try, can't do it. And then same thing goes for those, but I'm not going to show you, you know, incorrectly putting those. What is this exactly? That is for the battery, my friends. So that's for this part to go in. So right there, and you just put it on, but you have to put it there and then you slide it down, and then right there. And then if you want to remove it, you just push this right there, slide up, right back out right there. And you might be wondering, why do you have the battery on the side? Well, here I'm showing you what is the actual device itself. You know, on the base. This base actually comes in the box, so it's very nice to have it around. I like to have it around, you know, just to kind of lay it as, you know, as you've seen on the intro there, like that. Very nice, very, you know, minimalistic, very snug. But essentially, this is the battery right here. In terms of how long it would last you, about 2 hours is what Samsung claims. So they say around 2 hours. And I'll throw up the specs right on screen so you guys can see. Not 120 hertz as you would get on the Apple Vision Pro, but you do get YouTube. But yeah, and I'm not claiming they're better, I'm not claiming they're worse. I do like these, and they are cheaper. They are cheaper, and I believe they're on discount right now, if I'm not mistaken. Which to me is like, you know, pardon the French, very stupid, because it's like they just came out and you guys now are discounting it. Now, pretty sure you guys seen, you know, the case you can throw it on, the controllers. Unfortunately, I do not have those, and they are out of stock and cannot be shipped to where I live. So I'm very frustrated with that part, because, you know, with Samsung, like, come on, if you know there's going to be a market for these, at least produce enough units for, you know, every single one of these. But anyways, the cover. So the cover, it seems to be like a very like soft suede kind of feeling material. And in terms of like cleaning this area right here, the glass part, you do get like a little Samsung little fiber cloth. I don't have that on hand. I should have it around, but fortunately I do not have that on hand. But yeah, and then in terms of putting this back on, you know, it does cringe me a little bit, but what I like to do is I like to start from the top, pause, and finish at the bottom. Again, pause. But yeah, you know, it's a very, very nice device, you know, comfortable. I'll give them that. And, you know, as a person with long hair, you know, it's very comfortable. You can like work around with this and, you know, this, but it's very nice. It's a very nice, stable, not heavy. And, you know, the device does get hot, but not in a bad way. Let me explain. So it comes from the two vents that you've seen up here. So if you put your hand near that, like obviously, you know, you're going to feel the heat, all that, you know, jazz. But, yeah, you know, it's very, I would say, minimalistic device, and it's a very like nice space, like I said, to like set it up somewhere, maybe on a desk, like for example here, as you see right now. And when it comes to compatibility, unfortunately, it is only compatible to Samsung devices. So if you're thinking maybe, you know, let's connect it to, I don't know, my Apple ecosystem, my Google ecosystem, really stupid. But essentially, if you have, for example, you know, I have my Z Fold here, and you know, my Tab, and I have my Book 4 Ultra. I can connect those, so you can do, I think it was the PC Link, something like that. And if you want to play games, you know, you can just hook it up to this, and you know, just play games from there, from Steam. Well, from your computer, from Steam to here. This does come with one game. It's something to do with like an office and like robots. It's very weird, but fun though. In terms of, you know, like the durability, from, you know, my opinion, it seems to be very durable. Like this plastic isn't bendy, as you can see. Like I'm not gonna try to, you know, do a Jerry rigs everything kind of episode here, but it does seem to be very stable, you know, very durable. And yeah, you know, for the most part, it's plastic, as you may know, and then this part would be like your more expensive part, and you know, down here these. And I forgot to mention, you can opt for what is like lenses for these things. So you know, if you're visually impaired, well, obviously if you're blind, you know, you can't use them, right? But you know, if you have poor eyesight or something, you can, you know, always do that through the Samsung website or the Samsung shop, and you know, have them fix you up a little, you know, pair of lenses. And what do I think of the device overall? It's nice, but like I said, I feel like it would be a very small market for these, which I feel like is the reason why they're on such a discount, and they're not sold out, which is crazy. But the controllers are, and the cases are. I don't know if that's just Samsung pulling those items back or if they're genuinely sold out. But yeah, you know, overall, I give the device maybe a 8.5 out of 10. You know, it's not bad. It's not a bad device. Maybe a thing or two I would say to add, to remove, things like that. But you know, overall, it's a great device. For the price point, I do find it a little steep. Just because you have things such as the MetaQuest. So you know, great devices. Those are great devices. My issue with those is the weight and them realistically overheating. That's my only issues with those. With this, my issue is the price point. That's about it. I mean, it's not as bad as like the Apple Vision Pro, but I feel like it could go a little lower in terms of, you know, that. Like I feel like maybe $1,000, even maybe $999 would be, you know, a little better. But yeah, you know, like costing almost the same as essentially, you know, an S25 Ultra, for something like this. I feel like, you know, and I get it, you know, you got to pay for the labor costs, you know, the shipping, the development, you know, all that fun stuff and all that jazz. But you know, I if you can see one maybe on Facebook Marketplace, you know, eBay, if you can find one for a lower price, I would say it's definitely worth it. Especially if you have a Samsung ecosystem or if you are a collector in, like I said, this kind of, you know, criteria. Yeah, you know, it's not a bad device. I would not highly recommend it, and I'm not here to, you know, sell you on this thing or, you know, tell you not to buy it. You know, it's your money, your choice. But if you ask me, if you have the money, go for it. You know, it's not something you won't regret or will regret. It's just something you'll have and maybe use it once or twice, you know. But it's very fun, and I could see this being used a lot in terms of, you know, flights, hotels, you know, not necessarily meetings or anything like that. But I mean, shit, if you do use it, you know, cool. You know, I would like to see that. But yeah, you know, that's this. That's the Galaxy XR for you. And then other than that, you know, thank you guys for watching.